Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with your host, Dr. Tony Wong. Today I'm with Christopher. Chris, can you give us a brief intro about yourself?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Christopher Brown. I live in San Francisco. I'm the founding managing partner for the Nova Rose Group, which is a small consulting firm. My background is in law and public policy and worked a long time in politics and advised companies, public officials, governments, and other institutions navigate public policy issues and political issues.
Now, Chris, we're now seeing like 50 different states approaches to like AI regulations with like, for instance, Colorado leading the charge on like algorithmic discrimination laws. Is a fragmented like regulatory landscape genuinely harming innovation, or is it actually like a healthy laboratory for like democracy where states can experiment with like different approaches?
Excellent question. I think that what makes this one tougher to answer is the context in which we're talking about, which is artificial intelligence and technology, which is constantly evolving at such a rapid clip. And so while I would say for instance, in my years back in the healthcare space, for instance, when we were trying to reform the healthcare system, you wanted this regulatory, laboratory of states around the country who were trying different approaches to see what the best practices were so that it can help inform a national approach. In this context, the 1,000+ bills that have been introduced and passed into law locally and around states really does create a unique challenge, I think, for our economy, as well as frankly, the world, because of the global nature of this movement and this industry. So it's a complicated, I think, answer to your question. And I think that's part of why it's very important for us to get this right because of how big the stakes are across our economy.
Now, last month, December 2025, President Trump executed an executive order that creates an AI litigation task force specifically to challenge state AI laws. But what does this mean for like our democracy when the federal government is like essentially threatening to sue states for trying to protect their citizens from AI harm?
Yeah, it was quite surprising to see that they took this approach because you would assume and hope that the federal government will want to partner and collaborate with states as opposed to coming straight out the gate saying we want to challenge any, regulations and laws on the books that we don't like. I think to have a national direction and framework for having a uniform approach to this industry is actually right. I think we do need a uniform approach to this industry and these sets of tools. But the way they're going about it, I think there's a better way. And I think we've had, many examples where I think we can learn to help expose where that better way, how that shows up. But this task force, I think presents a unique challenge. I think there's other pieces here that I think we could still rally behind as a country, other stakeholders from civil society to business to finance even. We really, I think, need to come to the table in a slightly different posture as opposed to looking directly at which laws may conflict with a sort of, set of undefined policy goals at this point.
And the executive order calls for like a minimally burdensome national standard for AI. But how do we like define what counts as like burdensome versus like what's necessary to protect consumers from like algorithmic discrimination in like hiring, lending, healthcare decisions?
Absolutely. That is the magic question. And I think we have to really come together to build that definition. Where are the lines? Where are the opportunities for us to really have the most impact? Because as we all know and have recognized over these past several years in this discussion is that, of course, AI brings tremendous opportunities, but also tremendous risks. And where those risks shake out in community and across the national economy and even the global kind of stage, there are so many potential pitfalls to where if we don't get it right, we really do hand over the keys to another nation. So while I think this dominance, the American dominance goal of remaining in the number one position is a fair goal to have, I think we actually undermine that effort when we go about it in this way, where we're not actually thinking about building into this, what I would consider a part of our civic infrastructure now. Artificial intelligence is no longer just a set of cool apps right? This is now part of our culture, part of our society, part of our economy, and it's not going anywhere. And because it's not going anywhere, I think we need to have some strategic direction and conversations about how to make sure we get this right. I think it's gotten a little political, very political for a lot of different reasons. And I fear that if we don't get this right, we really actually lose our position on the global stage.
Um, Amazon, Google, Meta, Microsoft, they're spending roughly like 400 billion a year on like AI infrastructure alone. OpenAI wants to spend over a trillion on data centers. At like what point does like the fear of missing out become a financial like contagion?
We're missing out, becoming a financial contagion. The first thing that comes to mind in that question is this the speculation around whether this is a AI bubble or not, right? So I think a lot hinges on whether or not how, what this marketplace really produces in the next few years. The data centers, the investments, I think what we are seeing is this global race and corporate race for dominance in this space, which is very typical. However, we're not fully measuring the impact that we really want to have first, right? So how are we actually thinking about designing? So this is no longer just a new cool opportunity. I think we really need to zoom out and think of the larger elephant that we are actually all touching at different points right here, right now. I think many folks in different sectors are touching one part of the elephant with blindfold, not fully seeing the bigger picture. If we were able to zoom out and really understand the full intention here, I think we actually can enter a different conversation when it comes to how do we build this system that really needs to contain and hold this new technology in all of its many facets. I think that's the opportunity, and I think we're losing a critical opportunity if we're not approaching it from that standpoint. I think right now we're coming at it as all eyes on competition, all eyes on speed. But I would warn us to say we probably need to also really think differently about the risk profile that it not only poses for individuals and in society, but even for our financiers in this industry, right? I partner and work with investors in this space, and the regulatory risk profile, for instance, and other risk profiles are still unclear, right? Because we're still in this 50 state patchwork right now. And we don't really see where this federal move with the executive order is really going to help us get closer anytime soon with a set of agreements on how to really handle where we go next.
Now we're seeing like Nvidia invest like $100 billion in OpenAI, which then uses that money to buy like Nvidia chips, which I think is kind of interesting. Some analysis are calling these like arrangements eerily similar to like the financial engineerings that preceded the 2008 crash. Should like regulators be more concerned about what's going on with that?
Should they be more concerned about what type of spending we're seeing on the chips?
Yeah, well, because they're basically just the money's just moving back and forth, right? Like Nvidia is like investing the money into OpenAI. OpenAI takes that money and buys Nvidia chips. So like the money just like cycles between friends, basically.
Yeah, yeah. It's a concern. I think regulators really do need to think about that. But to me, that's just one piece of the puzzle. I think the larger piece here really is how do we make sure that this really gets at solving major problems that we have in our country and in our society. And I don't think we get there by this approach of saying we'll know it when we see it, whether or not we want to invalidate or litigate or come after or change. We want to call it a light touch framework, but really what we're doing is it sounds like more so trying to create a witch hunt here for bad ideas that get in the way of some of these profits that we're seeing. Nothing wrong with making profit. I'm a capitalist. However, the stakes here are so different and so massive when it comes to workforce, right? When it comes to community health, when it comes to people's health, right? I mean, I read this morning that the healthcare industry is, already spending 27% of its resources towards, AI tools in a different way than other sectors, leading the charge for other sectors. What does this mean for patients? And of course, the providers, and of course, all the stakeholders in the health system. Again, great benefits, great opportunity, but the risk here is so different. And I think that is where we are missing a bit as to how do we really start to wrap our collective hands around understanding these risks and putting some rules to the road here. I mean, an analogy to think about is sure, we have, if you think of the internet as a series of local and state roads that in theory will get you from California to New York, no problem if you have, the ability to get there. Now we're in the conversation with AI about designing a national highway system. Very different project, right? You can still go from California to New York, but now we're doing it quicker. Now more people can get to New York quicker, more accessible. What does that look like? Well, you can't just skip over all the states in between California and New York. You got to figure out what this looks like at every stop along the way to create that national highway system. And so that's why I think of this as an infrastructure dilemma for us to really come together on. Thankfully, we're seeing that this is not strictly a kind of partisan issue, even though parts of it has become very partisan. But you do see people on both sides of the aisle expressing real concerns with where we're going with building out this infrastructure and what those trillions of dollars mean when we talk about creating new data centers, right? As just one part of the equation. And so each step along the way, I think we really would serve our national interests in a very productive way if we slow down a bit and actually try to figure out what a comprehensive approach could be to designing the future of this technology. What the rules of the roads are going to be, who's licensed, how fast can you travel on certain parts of this highway, what kind of stops are necessary, what kind of resources are needed along the way as you go from California to New York. Just as an analogy to think about all the pieces here that, many could see as just roadblocks, but really are going to define how successful we really are in this global AI race.
Gotcha. And then in terms of like just everyone's AI spending right now, I mean, companies are making multi-year data center commitments while revenue growth kind of remains unpredicted. So like what happens if like the revenue never catches up to the investment for a lot of these companies?
Another reason, right, that investors and business really should think differently a bit about how fast they're going. Who else are we engaging as we're pouring those trillions of investment dollars into this technology, right, and the infrastructure? You're right. This could all blow up in our face in different ways, right? Each sector has a different set of incentives. And so in my work, my job has always been to figure out how to align the incentives, right? So that when financiers and business technologists and community advocates and other institutions approach a set of issues surrounding AI in a particular way, we actually can all move in the same direction. Right now, we're actually at kind of this like four-way stop intersection, right? Where you have like community pulling up to the stop sign over here. You got the business folks, you got government, and then you have this open fourth lane, and that's AI. Everyone wants to go down AI. Okay. Who goes first? What signaling are we doing to each other? How are we communicating? First off, I don't even know you, right? I don't even know where you went to get your driver's license, right? So there's a lot of conversation, I think, in relationship building across these sectors that I think is needed for us to really do this safely. Otherwise, we're just kind of on a collision course.
And in terms of like the EU AI Act, that's now in force and it's affecting like a lot of AI systems that touches the European market. Some US companies are choosing not to simply not release like certain AI features in Europe rather than complying. Are we headed towards like a fragmented global AI market with that?
Absolutely. If we don't figure this out, because right now with the patchwork framework, that's kind of what we're stuck with, right? A very different example, but just as, to give a corollary to another industry, I was part of the early days of the scooter revolution, right? And scooters were going to save, disconnected transit, and, people in places that don't have quick access to mobile options to get around. And what we saw over the, first several years was a patchwork. Every city had their own set of rules. right? Some cities didn't want it, some cities did, and next door to each other. And so what the industry had to struggle with was, how do you make this scooter go from this place to down the street that may cross a border and make the speed slow down because this city's speed limit is different than that speed limit. That's just one small example. Like, operationally, that's a nightmare for any company trying to do business across any sector. And so you want a national uniform. You want some general guidelines and baselines that can be useful at a national level, because that's good for business. And so I think, again, aligning the incentives where businesses can avoid regulatory whiplash. You have your finance and your investors understand the risk profile for this business, and making sure that also, again, the end users, the customers, consumers, our children. Frankly, I'm a father of two girls, right? One of the biggest nightmares I have is around how these online, predatory practices using AI can really be impactful, not just to my kids, but to everyone's kids. That all has to be a part of the conversation to figure out what the right rules of the road should be, and whether or not this is bigger than what my city's rules are versus what your city's rules are. I think this is an opportunity for the country to come together around some baseline ideas about basic protections that also allow for and foster innovation to help us maintain our dominance in this space, but also to protect our citizens, our families, our communities that I think, frankly, are most at risk here if we don't do it right.
And U.S. policies right now are explicitly like framing up AI development as a race against like adversaries like China. DeepSeek's like surprise launch in early 2025 like rattled the U.S. markets and caused a lot of stocks to like plummet. Does like framing AI as a like geopolitical competition actually distort like good policy decisions that are made in like the states?
It's an important factor to consider. Again, I wouldn't say that our goal here to maintain our dominance is a misguided one. I think how we're going about it may be a little challenging, because while you want to ensure that China doesn't win the race, you don't want to become China, right? We don't want to become a country where we don't care about privacy. We don't want to become a country where we don't care about uh, algorithmic bias and discrimination in our workforce, right? We don't want to supercharge some of the challenges that we're seeing with AI. We're already seeing people die as a result of, right, some of these misguided tools that, frankly, were just doing what they're programmed to do, which is to share back information to people who are using the tool, as opposed to making sure that there's a layer of human wisdom involved, right? We're seeing people who have committed suicide, unfortunately, because, again, the program is just doing what it's trained to do, which is to share more validating sentiment and information based on the user's desire and query. So going from the micro to the macro, what does that look like? When we're, yes, trying to ensure that we maintain our competitive edge against China and other countries. But again, we don't want to turn a blind eye to the things that, frankly, position China as our adversary because of the fact that they don't care about some of those things. So I think who ultimately wins the AI race is actually going to be the country that is able to demonstrate the system that is embedded with prosperity, embedded with affordability and equity and sustainability. Some of these may sound like buzz terms, but they mean real things to real people and, frankly, to real industries. And I think we have to, again, get this right, because this is different. It's very different.
The European Union emphasizes like risk management and like fundamental rights, while the U.S. emphasizes like innovation and minimal regulations. Can these two approaches like coexist, or will like companies be forced to like choose one side or the other?
I would like to think that we could come together and actually come up with a comprehensive set of approaches that does both, right? I think what we're seeing right now, unfortunately, is part of the patchwork is, frankly, different regulations being put forward that only focus on one part of the issue. So we're going to create a set of rules for the elephant's foot, but we don't have the rules or the scope of the larger animal here. A lot of these laws are like that. They're focusing on the tail or the trunk or the foot. And we really need to zoom out and think about what is the comprehensive approach here needed for the whole animal. This is a potentially unwieldy animal, right? That may get out of our control. And I think we want to make sure that we remain in control.
Colorado's AI Act tries to prevent AI systems from making discriminatory, consequential decisions in areas like employment, lending, and healthcare. The White House claims that these laws could enforce, like, force AI models to produce false results. So, like, who's right?
Yeah, I don't know enough to say who's right there, but what we do know about this administration is that they don't actually care anything about what Colorado is trying to do as a principle of right of matter. They, I think Colorado sounds like they're on the right track in terms of wanting to embed some type of something, some level of protection against the potential downsides of over relying on the technology to feed your workforce, right? We have federal laws on the books that do the same thing. So now that we have this new tool in place where we're seeing companies rely on the technology to help screen and hire applicants, I think we really have to take a close look as to, well, uh, why are we instantly invalidating or saying, maybe there's a problem with the tools, and so maybe that's what the administration is commenting on. But what we do know for a fact is that they don't, the goals here are misaligned. We've seen an active push to remove anti-discrimination practices and tools from this administration, both at the federal level and at a local level. So it's not surprising to kind of see, right, uh, them challenging Colorado on this one. But again, I think if we enter the right process of coming together around a comprehensive set of protocols and expectations, hopefully we can still advance our current laws that are on the books that, by the way, get at preventing discrimination in the workforce.
Now, like, AI is increasingly being used in hiring, performance evaluations, and like workplace monitoring. Should workers have a right to know when AI is being used to make decisions about their careers?
That's a really good one. I would like to know. I think most people would. And so, again, down to the rules of the road, does that mean that we have to allow that? Or should we allow that? Should we mandate it? That is a policy discussion. And I think it has to be a relevant part of a comprehensive set of discussions, right? It's one small piece, again, the toe of the elephant. And so I think that these are excellent examples of where there's so many nuances and nooks and crannies within this area that, frankly, I think in time we will see this will become a large area of law, right? The question is how and when will we get there? And through what mechanism? Is it going to be legislated, or are we just going to have to sue each other to death over the next 10 years, right? To figure out what the rules here really are. Oh, by the way, who loses there, right? Businesses don't do very well when you just have that many lawsuits to figure out what the rules are. I think everyone would agree that having clear rules and baselines could be helpful, right? From an industry perspective, if that's all you care about, but also, right, for the citizenry and the 300 plus million people that we have living here using this technology in the larger global context.
Before we get to our last question, for the audience that listening at home, if they want to get in contact with you, what's the best way?
Oh, great. You can email me at chris@novarose.io. It's the best way. And yeah, my website is available online as well. www.novarose.io.
And then last question, Congress has repeatedly failed to pass a comprehensive AI legislation. If you were to draft like a federal law that protects both like consumers and doesn't like stifle innovation, what would be like the key provisions that you would have in there?
Absolutely. First, I would want to make sure that the best thinkers across our different sectors are included in that conversation, right? And that's a hefty order. That's a tall order. I've been involved in some of those conversations where we're trying to revamp our healthcare system. We want to revamp our banking system. Everyone has a dog in that fight. Everyone has a car on that road that we are now building with AI. And so I first want to make sure we have the right leadership in those conversations. I think second, we would really need to define and want to make sure that comprehensive is defined. There are so many applications and use cases, but also risk issues and opportunity costs to weigh out here. And so employment is one, healthcare is one, finance is another, but there are so many. And so I think part two would be to make sure that we're covering the right topic areas in a set of in a comprehensive way that helps us really fully grasp the full set of issues before putting pen to paper. I think right now we are challenged in that arena. I think most of our rules and actions that we're seeing are kind of narrowly focused, but you do see some really interesting approaches. California, for instance, where I live, other places, Colorado, you mentioned, who were trying to get their hands around the kind of the multifaceted nature of this animal. But I think that's a job for one, trusted leadership at a national level, which I think we struggle with, frankly. And I think once we find a way to have a trusted convener and leader around these issues, that people can come to the table and feel confident that we can have a good faith conversation about the elements of comprehensive AI legislation, I think we could see some real progress. But I think we have quite a bit of road to travel before we get there.
Chris, thanks again for being on the show. I learned so much about innovation and regulations from your point of view. And to the viewers listening at home, stay curious.